So in 2007, a group of mountain gorillas were killed in the Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And many of you might have seen this photo and know the story of how charcoal traders shot Senkwekwe, the silverback, 8 times in his back and lit 2 females on fire. 6 of the 10 members of the group were killed, and this was an effort for them to take control of the park. Because if the gorillas weren't there, then the park is theirs to cut down the trees for the charcoal. And what this illustrates is the conflict, the struggle between humans, wildlife, and the environment that the mountain gorilla faces. And what I want to talk about today is that struggle, while seemingly insurmountable, this is a species that has faced like a perfect storm, if you will, of threats, and through a One Health approach, has recovered. And it's an amazing story. And the recovery is said to represent one of the greatest success stories of modern conservation. The mountain gorilla is found in only two regions, and they're isolated for over 1,000 years. Bwindi in Uganda, and the Virunga Massif, which is partly in Rwanda, DR Congo, and Uganda. And of course, in '67, Diane Fossey started an 18-year study on the mountain gorilla. I think by 1981, the nadir was about 250 animals. So this is a critically endangered species. She for sure thought they would be extinct by the end of the century, and she pleaded for a veterinarian to come and basically care for ill, injured, orphaned gorillas. And these are, you know, the habitat was decreasing, the poaching levels were coming up, and what happened was the advent of the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project. This is now called Gorilla Doctors. It's managed by UC Davis. And what started with the program was basic veterinary care, and over the years it developed into using a One Health approach to kind of link, again, the struggle between humans, wildlife, and the environment. And this is not any news to anybody, but on a basic level, One Health is the interrelationship between human health, animal health, and the environment. So with environmental health, if you will, this mountain gorilla might be looking over what used to be his home. The parks, particularly in the Virunga Massif, have lost probably over 40 to 50% since like the 1950s. And there is no buffer zone between agriculture and forest. So this creates, again, that interface and that struggle between humans, wildlife, and the environment. And so you don't have to hear me talk so much. On the environmental threat level, this is really best depicted in a trailer that Orlando gave me permission to use. Do you have a sound?
Le parc national de Virunga contribue au développement de notre pays.
A region famous for its endangered mountain gorillas.
C'est ça ma vie. Ils ont l'amour.
Notre vie en dépend beaucoup.
We think that we have a problem.
A British company is exploring for oil.
My work is to manage the park to ensure that it's protected. Any oil-related activities are illegal.
All the armed groups will want their slice of the cake.
I think they're playing with fire.
It's the money that fuels everything. Blame God.
This isn't a war yet, but it could be soon.
Ça va barder ici.
The danger is near us.
The Congolese army is fleeing.
M23, ils sont là.
Fear has driven people out of these villages into farmland.
If we were to leave, we would lose everything.
The park itself is the only hope this region has. It's intense.
You must justify why you are on this earth.
Finalement, nous serons aussi jugés. Nous allons seulement croiser le bras quand le parc sera en train de disparaître. Pourtant, notre souhait est que ce parc reste immortel.
So this documentary was filmed over the 2 years that I was working in DR Congo with the mountain gorillas. And it's very realistic depiction of what was dealt with in that region. And of course, the political and economic things are not something a veterinarian conservationist can really deal with. But what we can do is try to understand that struggle and approach it from all three sides. The basis of the conflict in DRC is, of course, resource acquisition. And so as an environmental threat, that is very much linked to the gorilla health. The armed conflict, a lot of what you see here, this was a M23 rebels. And it was, there's what you may see in the movie, if you see the documentary, is that there are only 4 mountain gorillas in captivity in the world. And they were at that room in Gabo that was bombed. So it's very kind of emotional for me being there at that time, where there was a 4-hour ceasefire that was negotiated with the rebels for me to come up and move those gorillas. It's just an unrealistic story, and yet these gorillas have recovered, and it's a huge, huge success. So that civil war has resulted in the death of over 6 million people in DRC, and that's been characterized as the biggest cause of human suffering since World War II. And so like the ways that Gorilla Doctors has tried to approach it is to address threats on those 3 levels: environmental health, animal health, and human health. Environmental health, there are different ways, as you heard in some of the other talks, is that you can provide job opportunities through gorilla tourism. Jobs are offered as porters and rangers. And we also did a eco briquette program, which also decreases pressure on the park. And animal health, I mean, you can see there's no buffer zone between the agricultural land and the park. And so you're seeing gorillas coming out of the park, particularly to eat eucalyptus. You're seeing domestic animals and people going into the park, again, for resources. And there are parasites that we've documented that are in both humans, cattle, and gorillas. So this is kind of an interface, which is kind of a perfect way that infectious diseases might be introduced into the animal population here, talking about gorillas. And then on top of that, it's a huge tourism industry. And this is very successful for these 3 countries, and it's also then successful for the gorillas. But it also creates an interaction. There is an 8-meter rule with tourists, but the gorillas don't know that. They'll come right and sit in your lap. And so there is that potential for disease infection. And a common cold virus, metapneumovirus virus, has infected and killed gorillas. There has been a measles outbreak. These are fairly thought to be directly linked to tourism. And if you take trauma, specifically conspecific trauma, out of the equation, the lead cause of death in mountain gorillas is respiratory disease. And that is a very, very real possibility that's coming from tourists. And so the solution there is, how can we monitor? This is kind of extreme conservation, that this species has veterinarians in all 3 countries there 24/7 to monitor and treat these gorillas. This is Dr. Eddie. He's a head Congolese vet, and he'll go out. We visit every group in every country, every habituated group, once a month at least. And he'll know every individual by their nose print, and he'll write down every single vital sign he can possibly get. And here he's taking the GPS location, and it's my favorite joke. Then the gorillas take his GPS location. So you can see how curious they are. You can't help but not love them. And this is the reason that we're able to create such extreme conservation. The tourism really is what's keeping this animal survival. So these are examples of interventions. The Gorilla Doctor team only intervenes when it's a life-threatening or human-induced injury. And then in terms of human health, this land right around the park edge is where the poorest people live, where the densest population is, up to 500 people per square kilometer. It's often, again, associated with poverty, highest HIV infection rates, lowest hygiene. These are 95% of these are people living here are subsistence farmers, they're making an average of $1 a day. So like the other talks, how can you judge how they're making their living, and what can you do to help negate, that struggle between human, wildlife, and environment? What can you do to release that pressure? And then also this is not a very good dense photo, but there are a lot of people just walking into the park that are right on that edge. And this is the poverty, the high human population density, the lack of hygiene, the landscape use that you're seeing, the change that you're seeing. This is kind of a perfect storm for emerging infectious diseases like Ebola, SARS, HIV. And so what Gorilla Doctors also participates in is a USAID program called PREDICT. And they look at finding novel infectious diseases at that interface between humans, wildlife, and livestock. In addition, Gorilla Doctors implemented an employee health program, and just from a 1-year period, so every ranger, porter, everyone who has contact with gorillas that goes into the forest is screened and treated if necessary. And also they do it like a mitigation of behavioral activities in the forest. And you can see just in 1 year that 13% of people that had no diseases went to 41% just 1 year of this program. And then of course community outreach and education is an important part of the project, and it's a way to convey the One Health message. And then the result of the efforts in combination with other partners, the mountain gorilla population over 7 years from 2003 to 2010 increased 26.3%, and they're increasing still. There's a difference between unhabituated and habituated gorilla. Obviously habituated you can't approach. The unhabituated gorillas were found to decline despite intense conservation, conventional conservation, about 0.7% over a 40-year period, while those that we could access for veterinary care, this extreme conservation, increased 4.1%. And that difference, up to 40% of that difference was attributed to this veterinary care. And this isn't just gonna help the mountain gorillas. This is the golden monkeys, the servals, buffalo, elephant, all these animals in the forest will reap those benefits. And again, it's just, there's these huge scales, particularly in these countries. It's amazing what Rwanda has come back from in '94 and DRC with this war that's ongoing, and to have this merging, if you will, this understanding, having 3 countries come together to save a species, it's pretty amazing what they've done considering the circumstances. And our goal is really just to have, it's very similar to your slide, have these happy, healthy gorillas next to happy, healthy children. And just basically that a One Health approach could prove to be the thin line between extinction and survival. Thanks.
We're a tad over, but let me just see if there's a question for Dawn.
How do you feel about us going to see them? It's a good idea or bad idea?
Yeah, the question is how do we feel about tourism? I think it's a good question. Diane Fossey was so against tourism, and it is one of those things with extreme conservation that if you're taking advantage of gorillas being habituated so that you could approach them, so that you can treat them. The thing is the tourism is already there. It's giving so much GDP to the country. It's 10% of Rwanda's. Each gorilla per year in Uganda is about giving $1 million, coming in with $1 million. It's no one's going to Rwanda except for gorillas, I don't think. So it's definitely it's a double-edged sword, if you will. So I mean, we do the best with the circumstances we're presented with. So obviously we'd like to see the gorillas living without this kind of contact, but in the world we live in now, we have to figure out a way to coexist and sustainably.